But I heard this beat come through and I was like, I need that. So I literally walked into the vocal booth and said, look, when you're done with that record, just give it to me. And he was like, yeah, cool. And he put on something else and mixed in another track. And I grabbed the record from him, went into the studio, sampled the beat, gave it back to him and started, continued to put the idea together. So it was, and that beat, I must admit, that the beat really drove me to kind of make the track as kind of hard as it was.
What's up everyone, this is your host Jack Acid and welcome to the first edition of Rave Reviews, where I discuss, review and reminisce about all things old school. Whether you're an original raver or just discovering this amazing music, I will attempt to review the essential old school tracks that made the scene what it was and why you need them in your collection. Let's kick off this series by asking and answering the impossible question. What is the greatest hardcore rave track of them all? I'm sat here talking to you in early September 2022 and I'm holding a record in my hand that I honestly consider the greatest hardcore rave track ever released. The original never had a wide or even a very successful release and therefore it wasn't very well known in the hardcore rave scene even at the time. To add to its comparative rarity, this is the first EP ever released on the mighty Bush Records, a massively important label that would go on to achieve iconic status in the 90s and beyond. Copies of this record have been trading for about £60 and above for 2 decades or more on Discogs. So why do I feel compelled to make a mini-film about this one track out of the thousands of absolutely stunning hardcore rave tracks that came out in the early 90s? What is it exactly about this record that 30 years later I still consider it to be one of the most groundbreaking, unique and devastatingly effective dance records of all time? There's a lot to say with 30 years of ground to cover, so I'll do my best to keep things on point. And while this may sound like a story of one man's obsession, and it is a little bit about my obsession, it's actually about the powerful, lasting effect that music can have on the human psyche. I'm 47 years old and I've been into old school dance music since the late 80s. I was lucky enough to grow up during the last great musical youth movement. I listened and danced to early house, acid house, hip house, rave, hardcore, happy hardcore, dark side, jungle and drum and bass. And I spent the entire decade of the 90s dancing and clubbing to these various genres as they developed and carved out their unique place on our beloved dance floors. But of all the different styles and genres of dance music that I danced to in the 90s, it was the hardcore rave scene that affected me the most. And no, I'm not referring to the chemicals, I mean the music. Because for me, it's only ever been about the music. Because today I want to discuss what I consider to be the greatest hardcore rave track of them all. By the end of this video, you might even agree with me. Or you won't. But maybe, just maybe, you'll consider what I have to say and enjoy the story behind my reasoning. Now, if I'm going to make my case, I have to place the story in some context, so indulge me whilst I take you back 30 years to where it all started. This is Bangor. It's a small city in North Wales, and it's where I lived for the first 24 years of my life. But contrary to the song, if you do go down to Bangor today, you probably won't have a lovely time, as it's practically shut down now as a city, having never recovered from the financial crisis of 2008. But 30 years ago, it was a very different place. Believe it or not, Bangor had a thriving social and raving scene. And I would argue that it was largely because of one dingy-looking nightclub, then known as the Octagon. This is the Octagon as it was in the mid to late 80s. A typical discotheque of its time, its crowning achievement in the 80s was having the UK's leading page 3 girl Samantha Fox perform her one and only pop hit on stage. It even had an under-18s night called Tots and Teens, where I got to see Grange Hill's leading lady of the moment, Georgina Hayes, in 1988. I digress. What I'm trying to convey here is that of all the places on earth that would act as a nurturing ground for the truly thriving rave scene in Wales, the last place you'd expect to find it would be in a club like this. Because whilst it looked every inch the type of place that Peter Stringfellow would hang out at the weekend, every Wednesday, between the ludicrously short hours of 8 to half midnight, the Octagon went from this to this. This is chaos. Not literally, although it was a brilliantly apt name for a rave night. It was the brainchild of a local DJ and promoter called Voidoid, and he very much tapped into the moment as he was one of the most prolific promoters of dance music nights in North Wales at that time. Big respect to Voidoid for his vision, because this midweek party changed and dominated my life between the years of 1991 and 1993. And it was amongst this strobing mass of hand movements and fancy footwork dancing that I found my whole reason to exist. Sure, I was legally a bit too young to go there, but that was nothing that 3 tops and a bucket hat couldn't cure. And so I found myself in the early days of the hardcore rave scene, getting to hear and actually dance to the latest tracks, seeing all the big name DJs and rave acts of the day perform at this little club. But of all the scene-changing, genre-influencing tracks that I was lucky enough to rave to in those pioneering days of hardcore, there's one track that I come back to time and time again as the perfect example of what the old school rave scene was all about. It's a track that I first heard exactly 30 years ago in that club. And although I wasn't to know it at that time, I'd never hear it again outside of that place, or on any radio station, or hear it feature on any of the thousands of rave mixtapes I had back then. Nobody in my circle of friends knew what it was called, and I've calculated that I could only have heard it in total about 7 to 8 times in that club during the brief summer of 1992. And when you consider the average running time of a track in a mix, that amounts to about 12 to 16 minutes of airtime in totality 30 years ago. And crazy as it may sound, I can recall the very first time I even heard this track and where I was standing in the club when it came on. To say that this has had a life-altering impact on me from that second forward would be an understatement. Listen to this now, as the whirling, distorted and confused electronic intro gives way to something absolutely stunning and truly unique. What is the track in question? Psychosis by the Sandman. This is the track in question. You're looking at my original copy that I bought in 1995, 3 years after it was released and about a year after I found out what it was called. RIP, hard to find records. This record is so precious to me that if my house was on fire, I'd brave the flames in order to save this vinyl. And this marks it out to be something truly special. Here's why. In order for me to say how good a track is, I have to judge it on the following points. Number 1, how original was it? With the exception of the ambient breakbeat, this simply didn't sound like anything else at that time or since. This isn't ragga hardcore, it's not uplifting piano rave music, nor is it Hoover's bass and breakbeats. This is pure melodic breakbeat techno and utterly unique, and sounds as original and fresh in 2022 as it did in 1992. Number 2, how well engineered and produced is it in comparison to other tracks? Well, just listen to it. It's a frantic, busy tune. In fact, the entire EP is brimming with clean, crisp sounds the entire way through. The arrangements on every track on this EP are simply breathtaking and clearly the work of someone with an exceptional ear for sonics and composition. Number 3, how effective was or is it in getting people to dance? Now, if only I had a time machine to show you how that little nightclub exploded whenever this was dropped. I'm biased perhaps, but I can't recall a single person sitting down and just nodding to this track. Number 4, does it split opinion or is it generally held in very high regard? To answer this as objectively as I can, go to YouTube and look it up and look at all the comments about this track, including the Old School Hardcore Facebook page. Enough said. Now, to be fair, there are many hardcore tracks that I consider to be absolute stone-cold classics of their time, ranging from the relatively simple to the more layered and complex. And to be sure, I'll be making videos about these as well. But for me, this record stands clear of them all, maybe just by millimeters in some instances, but in my honest opinion, there's never been a track quite like this before or since. So who better than to chat to the man behind this EP to ask him about his inspiration? This is what Drew Milligan, also known as the Soundman, has to say.
Now the question I wanted to ask you at that point before we got cut off was, did you have that track fully formed in your head at that moment, or were you purely making something at that moment? Was that a moment of time that was producing that track rather than something that was pre-planned, as it were?
Yeah, I from what I remember, it was literally just a vibe. I was just going with what I felt. I mean, I hadn't really been producing music for that long, at that point. I hadn't really done a lot of finished tracks, per se. So I think at that point I was just literally vibing. I liked the sound of that beat. I was just jamming. I probably hadn't had the JD800 that long. So I was still, when you get new sounds and you're just like, everything's inspiring, so you just can't stop writing stuff because every new sound you pull up, you're like, oh, this is another one, I think I was still at that stage. I was playing around with the programming a little bit, so maybe not changing things too much, but maybe just playing around with the sounds a little bit. So yeah, it was definitely a vibe though. There was no plan. Sometimes I think as time goes on, you start to get to the point where you can start with a top line or drums and then start to hear in your head how the production's going to go and where you want the track to go. But I don't think I was there at that point. I don't think I was there. I think I was far from that, and it was just getting a vibe and seeing what came out. I think when you're just in the zone, and you can't help it, it's like you can't stop, because I was probably in there really, really late. Like I said to you before, smoking a few spliffs and everything, and I was just in the zone, so I probably just did most of it that night and then came back and just did a few little tweaks. And I had seriously, like, I had no idea what I was doing mixing wise or anything like that. I mean, I was so I had no idea the mix, and that's why I listen to the mix now and I cringe, because it's so god awful, muffled, and it's like, I remember hearing back from Eric Powell when he went to get it pressed,
right,
and he went into the pressing plant and went to get the lacquer done, and the needle bounced out of the fucking groove, you know what I mean? It's like, the bass was just ridiculous, so they had to master it a little bit and play around with the EQ a bit, because that was Eric's first release as well, through Bush. I don't think he really had much of an idea either. Right. You know what I mean? So I think, it was when I met the guys at Bush, when I went over to Manchester, it was all young people. It was all young. They were all my age. You know what I mean? Everyone was kind of just getting going. Nobody really knew what they were doing necessarily. And obviously, that comes with time and experience. But yeah, it was very much kind of like, let's just get it out. I gave him that, and he went and got it mastered and just wanted to get the vinyl out as quick as he could, I guess.
It fascinates me how a record like that didn't do as commercially well on the rave scene as I would have liked it to have done. Can you talk to how you felt when it was coming out? Did you have any delusions of grandeur about it at the time? If that's not being rude about it necessarily. Did you feel it was mishandled, or what are your thoughts about that?
To get a record released at whatever I was, 19, 20 years old, I was pretty like, wow, this is it, you know. And I did, and when you say, yeah, delusions of grandeur, yeah, I'm sure there's always some of that where I was like, that's it, I'm off now, you know what I mean? Like, you've got a record deal, you know. I signed a record deal, and I was just like, great, this is it then, you know. I don't remember being too devastated when it didn't kind of work out as far as my relationship with Bush. Obviously, I wish I'd have handled it differently had I known anything near to what I know now. But you know, so that was a shame more than anything. I think mismanaged and given bad advice. You know, so it was just, yeah, I think I was just really, really happy to get something out. I was really proud that I'd actually finished something and got something out.
Yeah. And
people seem to like it. Now, you know, we talked about this before. I mean, obviously there's no social media, there's no YouTube or anything like that. So I only knew people liked it, like my friends liked it, you know what I mean? And some of the DJs over here. I had no idea what was going on in the UK. I had no idea. And obviously because of the relationship with Eric at that point was non-existent, I was not getting any feedback from the label or any updates or anything like that. So I just had no clue, you know. It literally, when I found out, like I said, I don't even know exactly when it was, but I remember, you know, being on YouTube and thinking, oh, actually, I wonder if that's on there, you know. And then seeing all the comments, and I was dumbstruck, you know. And it was so nice because something that I thought that I felt very proud of and very, you know, happy about, like a goal that I'd achieved at that age. And then years and years later, just seeing how it had affected people and how much people loved it, that at that particular time for me meant so much, you know. I was just really chuffed. I was just really flattered that people thought that it was something at all, you know. So at that point, it was just really nice. And obviously then I heard more that it being played on radio quite a lot, and that, you know, it had kind of gone down. And then, you know, again, you know, being on Discogs and I was looking for probably the same kind of thing, and I was looking to make sure that I'd been credited for a track or something, like some kind of remix. And I thought, oh, I wonder if, you know, Sandman's on there. It was on there, and it was changing hands for like 50 quid. And I was like, what? This is
and more now.
You know, like you said, it wouldn't necessarily have been the case if it received that commercial success. It was because people consider it as an underground track. But then even hearing how, you know, young guys are responding to it and going, this even now feels like it's quite fresh. Yeah, you know, taking away the mix and the other parts, you know, but just the sounds and what it's doing maybe. And I'm like, God, that's really cool.
Drew, Sandman, thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure, Squire. And I hope to hear more from you in terms of music and from you personally as well.
Yeah, well, you never know. Like I said, I'd like to do something. You know, it would be fun. But again, you know, just so grateful to you. You know what I mean? You not giving up.
Yeah, right.
I know, obviously, with where I am right now and traveling so much and stuff like that, it's not been easy. But you know, you've just continued, and we've been in contact, and we've got it done finally. And yeah, I really appreciate everything that you've put into this. Like I said, it wouldn't have happened without you, full stop. There's no other question, you know what I mean? There, it's like, it wouldn't have happened. You made this happen. I'm so grateful. I appreciate everything that you put in, and more than anything, I just appreciate that the track meant something to you all those years ago. You know, that means everything to me.
Fast forward a couple of years, and this is why I'm holding the freshly remastered original EP in all its glory. Now, it's taken a while to get here, with the pandemic slowing down vinyl production everywhere across the world, but it's finally here. If you're an old school raver who missed out on this EP the first time around, or a newcomer to the scene looking to build up a genuine old school hardcore collection, then you have to have this record in your collection. The original suffered from being pressed a little bit too quietly, but this stunning repress has corrected that issue, and now you can listen to the power and majesty this original EP should have had 30 years ago. And I'm proud and honoured to have my name on the sleeve as a mark of respect and obsession to the small part I played in getting this record back out there. You can buy it directly from Nightforce Records using the link below, but be quick because it's got a limited run, and once it's gone, it's gone. So, do you agree with me that this is the best hardcore rave tune of them all, or do you have a suggestion for me to consider? Share your thoughts in the comment section, lovely people, and if I can answer, I will. If you stay to the end, thank you for your time. Consider subscribing and hitting the thumbs up. It all helps grow my channel and keep the old school vibe alive. Until next time, I've been Jack Acid, and this has been the Rave Review.